Welcome to the Idaho Home Garden Tips Show. You got me again tonight. We are going to talk about garden site preparation. Now, last week, 2 weeks ago, we talked about site selection. Tonight, we're going to talk about site preparation, garden site preparation. So, again, all gardening is local. What works in one place may not work in a place 10, 15 miles away, or even 100 yards away. Just kind of depends on your soil, your growing climate, and all that kind of stuff. So what I'd like to focus on tonight are in your preparation is weeds, the format, how you have your garden laid out, soil testing, ground prep, which would include, tillage, minimum till, no till, amendments, and mulch. But let's start with the weeds. Perennials are the biggest problem. Okay, you're always going to have annuals like this pineapple weed here. You're always going to have that, and you'll probably always have biennials sneak in. But perennials, you want to try to get those out of there before you start your garden. If you've already started your garden, okay, well, you have to deal with ways to get that out, and we'll talk about some of those things. You can use mulch, a woven fabric, the higher quality mulch. It'll last for quite a few years, as opposed to the stuff that just kind of falls apart. If you're going to invest in it, invest in something that's going to last for a while. Tillage usually doesn't work on perennials. Now, you can, if you till regularly, about every 3 weeks, you can pretty well knock them out, but then you don't get your garden. The one thing about weeds, though, is all of your site preparation, but the weeds especially, you want to start, if you haven't started your garden yet, you want to start last year. You can this year work on it and get it to work pretty good, but you really want to start on it last year. Sometimes we're reduced to using chemicals. One thing you want to be very careful of course, if you're going to use herbicides is the soil activity. You don't want to use herbicides that will stick around and cause problems for you later. So things like, glyphosate is fine. It gets tied up in the soil chemistry. It's not available to do any harm to the plants. That's why it's not absorbed through the roots. But some of these others, 2,4-D will have a fairly short life in the soil. But if you have something that's got dicamba or triclopyr or, heaven forbid, aminopyrrolid, you don't want to use those in your garden because they stick around. If you have to use a herbicide, be very, very careful what you're using. And again, start early. Now, format. This particular picture I took this morning on my garden. I've got them covered now. I'm able to help keep the heat of those water jugs in there. I am slowly transitioning to permanent walkways, permanent beds, permanent walkways. They're not really raised beds, although these are a little bit raised because I keep walking on the sod, on the wood chips, and so the wood chips get pressed down. Now I can just put some more wood chips in there and kind of bring it back up to grade, so that's not a big deal. I like the idea of having an area that I can walk on. I don't have to worry about it compacting the garden. I'm still toying with some other concepts as far as how wide to make them and things like that. But I've always gardened, and I will move stuff around, and some years I'll have plants where the walkways were, and that's fine. It works well. So I just kind of move my garden around. But you kind of need to decide if you're going to do permanent beds, raised beds, those kinds of things. That's great. You have your walkway area, and you can just focus on improving just that garden growing area. One thing you want to be, a couple of things if you're going to do that, though. If you have a wide bed like I've got here, these are 30 inches across, and I can straddle that and work over it if I want to that way. Or it's not too hard for me to step over. It starts getting more than 30 inches, I would have a little bit more trouble stepping over that. Now, if you're pretty tall and you can step over, you could do a wider bed. I've thought about making them about 40 inches, but I would have to step a long ways for that to work. And so I don't think I want to do a 40-inch bed. You can get more in, you have fewer walkways. Here I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 walkways essentially in my high tunnel. By making it 40-inch beds, I could make it 4 walkways. It doesn't improve the growing area a whole lot, but it does a little bit. I've got a friend down in Farron, Utah. He has his are about 4 feet across, but he plants from one side and then works on the other side. He basically works half and half. I kind of like the idea of being able to work from one side and cover practically the whole bed. So anyway, you just kind of just decide what works for you. If you want to move and have your garden be one of those shifting kinds of gardens like I've always done in the past, you may get some compaction areas because of where you've been walking on that garden. And so that may require a little bit of tillage. I've kind of gotten away from tillage. So decide what you want to do. The soil test, part of your preparation, you should know what you've got in the soil. So that means sending it into a lab somewhere. This is what you would get back from the Utah State University soils lab. You can do Stukenholz. You can do University of Idaho labs. It doesn't really matter. They're all qualified labs. They've all meet the requirements. They have to be in a society and all that kind of stuff. And they get their labs tested so that they know what they're doing. But some of them will do a little bit more than others. I don't know. I don't do a whole lot with the Stukenholz lab. I do know University of Idaho does the nitrogen test. Utah State University does not do the nitrogen test unless you specifically ask for it. The assumption is that we have low organic matter and we need to have a certain amount of nitrogen added every year. With the University of Idaho lab, they don't do that. The other thing though, with Utah State's lab is it is based all the recommendations that they give, and they give recommendations. University of Idaho does not give recommendations. You have to go back into their fact sheet that says, okay, this is how you interpret this particular test. You go in there and do that, and you get the information. You just have to do some of that work yourself. Utah State University does give recommendations. pH 7.7, about right for that rate. Salinity 0.8, that's good. Phosphorus adequate. The potassium was a little bit low, so the recommendation for them, if I had tested on these other things, they would have tested that as well. But they said, okay, you need to add a couple pounds of potash per 1,000 square feet and 2 to 4 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. But that's what their report looks like on the soil analysis. So now we've got decided how we're going to lay it out. We've done our soil test, and we know what we need to add to the soil, if anything. You need to decide, are you going to till or not till? About 3 years ago, I stopped tilling my garden. The main reason I stopped tilling my garden is because I just don't have the time. I'm too busy this time of year to till my garden and try to hit it right at the right time. Right now, of course, it's still covered with snow, but even after it's covered with snow, we'll have another couple of weeks before it'll dry out enough. Once the snow is gone, dry out enough for me to actually do any tilling. And so that puts me way, way, way behind. And so in doing that, I have found that my garden has done just as well without tillage. Now yours, if you've got a heavy clay soil, you may need to till, or there's other, compaction problems or things like that, you may need to till. But in my garden, I've been able to do it without tillage, and it's done very well for me. I used to till, the last time I tilled, I only tilled where the potatoes were. That was about 3 years ago, I guess. I haven't tilled this garden here very much at all. And I get plenty for what I want, and I sell the extra and give away to the kids. And so, I have plenty for what I need, and it works really well. So then the cover crops, are we going to do cover crops or not? Decide that if you're going to do cover crops, and then you can kind of plan out your garden. I've talked about it when I do my season extension presentation. You can have your cool season crops and put a cover crop in, then put cool season crops in the fall again. So you got a spring and a fall cool season, you got cover crops in the middle. The whole point with cover crops is to keep the ground covered and keep something live growing in the soil. And that will help your soil to stay healthier. If you start to leave the ground bare for a while, well, there's nothing really for the bacteria and the fungus to really work with if we don't have something growing. And so it really helps the soil to stay healthier if you have something growing on it. And besides that, nature hates bare ground. So if you don't get something growing on it, she'll try to get something growing on it. It'll probably be weeds or something you really don't want. So cover crops, if you've got a place in the window of time that you can do that to help keep that ground covered, it's a good idea. It's a good idea to add. We're low on organic matter, and so adding organic matter to the soil is a good idea. It's a good practice to do. When you start adding manure and compost, you have to be careful because you can get some phosphorus buildup if you do that. And we don't want to get too much phosphorus. We need phosphorus, but we don't want too much phosphorus. Also, especially with the manure, is weed seeds. If it's not being composted, you're going to get weed seeds. If it's been composted properly, then probably not. But the other thing with manure is salts. You'll get some salts built up with the manure. Especially the salinity of chicken manure is like, I said that one soil test was 0.8, salinity was 0.8. Chicken manure tests about an average of about 16 on the salinity scale, the electroconductivity, which is pretty high. It's probably the highest of most. Rabbit manure is really quite low. Be aware of the manure issues if you're bringing manure in. Also, with the compost, be very careful of your source. Make sure that they can certify that they don't have any herbicide residue in there, so that it's good and clean. And then how much do you put down? Typically about no more than a couple inches every year of compost. That's all you need. And whether or not you till it in is another question. Again, I don't like to do tillage just because I don't have the time. You can rake it in kind of with that topsoil. If you don't have any other crop growing there, you put it on and kind of rake it in. The microorganisms will come and work that down. But in the process, in the meantime, while they're working it down, you may end up with a little bit of nitrogen loss out of the compost. Compost will have some nitrogen in it, but if you don't get it tilled in or kind of worked into the ground, there will be some nitrogen loss out of that. So just kind of be aware of that particular issue. And then, mulches. I use a lot of mulch, this woven fabric for under my squash, under my tomatoes, under my peppers, under my cucumbers. I don't use it where I have my potatoes and corn and onions and carrots and radishes, all those kinds of things. I don't put them under, but I do under these others, tomatoes and cucumbers, squash plants.